for the envy that we may have for others, and to ask forgiveness from the person that we might be envious of, to rectify ourselves, someone we might be envious of. So tonight we're going to ask Shaykh Walead to explore the topic of envy, and more importantly, what we can do, you and I, what we can do to mitigate that, to erase the stain of envy in our lives. And inshallah, Shaykh Walead will address us for about half an hour. Then we'll have dua. And then inshallah, just after 9 o'clock, it's 9:04 today, Mississauga Standard Time, which is different from North York Standard Time and Scarborough Standard Time. Mississauga Standard Time, 9:04 inshallah. We'll call the adhan, we'll have some dates, we'll pray, and then we have a wonderful meal for everyone. We're expecting a lot of people tonight, so I just before we start, I will ask one more call on you, just to come forward a little bit more, so that when brothers and sisters come in closer to the iftar time, and we're not blaming them for that, because that's usually me, if I didn't have to be up here. As they come in, we want to make sure that we accommodate everyone, and we help our volunteers make this a wonderful evening. Once again, welcome to all of you. Welcome to Seekers Hub Toronto, and we'll speak to you about Hub activity soon. Without any further ado, Shaykh Walead.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. وأفضل الصلوات وأتم التسليمات على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وبعد. So we've been asked to speak about envy, known as hasad in Arabic. And envy is one of the cardinal vices. And it's an interesting vice. Interesting, not interesting like, oh, that's cool to be envious, but interesting in the sense that it's a confluence of several bad vices, I think, at once. And if you look at it and if you take it apart and look at its roots, then it may be that much more facilitated to overcome it. And there are various prophetic reports that say envy is a type of vice that will eat away at you and eat away at your deeds like fire eats away at dry wood. And so that means you could be doing a myriad of other things very well, but if you have this thing in your heart of envy or hasad, then it may render all the stuff that you're doing largely irrelevant in terms of your spiritual progression. So that's why it's, our scholars, they tell us it's very important that we work on removing our vices initially, before we think about embodying virtues, because they can't coexist, right? So if you think, can I be envious and generous at the same time? Kind of hard to do that, right? Because if you're coveting what other people have, that means you're not really happy with what you have, so would you be willing to part with it, what little you think you do have to begin with? So that's why this takhliya qabla tahliya, removing vice before embodying the sweetness of virtue. So when you have envy, you have a couple things going on. You have the person who is envious, and then you have the person who is the object of that envy, right? And there's a danger that the person who is envious can actually affect the one who is the object of that envy, right? And we say as regular formula of our dua, which is even a surah of the Quran, right? وَمِن شَرِّ حَاسِدٍ إِذَا حَسَدٍ, Surah Al-Falaq, right? That we seek protection from the one who's envious when they become envious. So it's doubly important then to think about it, because it not only affects you, but it can affect other people. And it can affect, I would say, society at large. You don't have a healthy community when there are people who are not happy with their lot in life, and they want to see that lot that other people possess to go away, because that's the definition of envy. It's to not just admire and covet what someone else has, but you actually want that thing to go away from that person. Whereas if you admire what they have, but at the same time you don't want it to leave that person, you just want something like it, then that could be commendable. Then we call that ghibta, right? The Quran talks about وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ, right? This tanafus or competition in vying for good works, that's something that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. That's commendable. But when you want it to go away from that person, that's indicative of a spiritual malady within you. And I said that it's a confluence of a couple things. One of those things, which I think is at the root of it, is you believe you deserve certain things in life. And most people actually believe that, right? Whether you want to admit that or not, we all kind of believe to some degree, I kind of deserve certain things in life. What's called in Arabic al-istihqaq, right? And that comes from the word haqq, which means I have a right to certain things in life, right? I should be accorded certain things in life. And more often than not, we base this on either who we think we are, who our parents are, what we do, what I do for a living, how many zeros are at the end of my bank account, myriad of things, what type of car I drive, so forth. Then we begin to feel like, well, I deserve certain things. You know, I should be having certain things in life. And it gets, I think, to its most dangerous when you base upon this feeling of istihqaq or deserving things in life because of what you think to be your religious practice. That's when it's its ugliest. You know, I pray tarawih, I give to the masjid, I do this, you know. I'm there on the first line at prayers, so, you know, where's my stuff? You know, where's the things that I'm supposed to, just, you know, that I'm expecting in life? And then when you see it with someone who seemingly is not, you know, in your opinion anyway, isn't deserving of it. What? That guy? He got that? I mean, he comes late to the masjid and he barely makes the last rak'ah, and he drives a very dilapidated 1987 Honda Civic. It's like, how can he, you know, be getting that stuff? And look at me, right? And then when you're looking at that person and you say, now there's a couple of you know, preambles that's going to happen before the actual full-blown envy. And one of those things will be izdira or istihqar, which means you belittle him in your eyes, right? Because one of the reasons you don't want that thing, or you believe it, he shouldn't have it, because they don't deserve it, and you do. And on what basis are you going to make that determination? Well, look at him, right? And it's more than often than not, it's going to be based upon outward aspects, because you don't know the inward. You only can see the outward. So you'll demean their own religious practice or their religiosity or what you think is their lack of piety. You'll demean the things that they possess or, you know, the things that associate with them. And you don't actually have to say something. All this is going to go on in your head, right? And I'm sure all of us, we probably felt it sometime in our life where this process actually happened. And the only way I can talk about it is from experience, not like you know. So once you get to that point, and then you want that thing to go away from them, then you've actually, it's not just, you've kind of traversed, you know, the Rubicon, so to speak, and it's not just about you anymore, you made it about somebody else, right? And that envy could actually cause you to do things even you're not aware of them, right? It may cause you to treat that person in a different way, right? Or to speak about them in a different way. Much of ghibah, much of backbiting comes from envy, right? They're all kind of related. So when you start talking about people in a way that's disparaging, you'd be like, you know what, that guy, he got that frontline job at the institute, and he drives like an '87 Civic. Can you believe that? You know, it's like, what's that? And then you say these things, or you think these things, and so forth, and it's gonna affect you more than it's gonna affect the other person. But then the question is, how do I get rid of that? Right? It's one thing to say, stop being envious, but, you know, how do I actually go about doing that? And if you look at the root causes, the number one thing I mentioned just now is this feeling of istihqaq, that you deserve things, and that based upon what you do, you put in, you know, a certain X, and then a certain Y should come back to you. And that is a skewed understanding of reality, because no single being on this earth deserves anything. Right? Take it back to the basics. None of us deserve anything, right? The things that you do, or you think that you do in service of Islam, for example, so to speak, Islam doesn't need anything from you, right? Allah doesn't need anything from you. Allah doesn't need your ibadah. He doesn't need your dua. He doesn't need your fasting. He doesn't need your praying. He is utterly unaffected by what you do. Yes, the Quran does say how Allah yuhibbul muhsinin wa la yuhibbul zalimin. Allah loves those who are muhsin and mu'min and Muslim and muttaqi and all of those good things that we want to be, and He dislikes or He doesn't love, right, those who are the opposite. But this should be understood in the light of that Allah is not because He's affected by those things or He actually has mule or inclination towards the things that He loves, but rather He will reward those who are of those type of people. And He may punish those who are not. Not that Allah is in need of that, right? It's not like Allah gets upset the way we get upset when, something of an unexpected circumstance happens. For Allah, there are no unexpected circumstances. He knows exactly what's going to happen every single infinitesimal moment of the day from now until the end of days, until there's no more days. He knows every single thing is going to happen. So there's nothing unexpected. But for us, our expectations, right, or our dashed hopes and unmet expectations will lead us to be upset, right, and will lead us to be unhappy. And then we're going to look for the sources of this unhappiness. And we want a way to understand the world so it makes sense. So when we look at someone else, and it seems like they're not doing what I'm doing, and they're not half of the person I am, but yet they have all this and they have so much, how's that right? How's that fair? Now you're getting into a very dangerous place. You're almost getting into, dare I say it, a satanic place. Because that's exactly what Satan did. That's how he felt. What destroyed him? His envy of our father, right? Adam alayhi salam. That's what destroyed him. What did he say to Allah? أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِّنْ خَلَقْتَنِي مِن نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِن طِينٍ. I am better than him. You created me from fire. You created him from clay. How can you ask me to prostrate before him? It should be the other way around. That's what Shaitan was thinking. Why should I be the one prostrating? I'm better. I was created first. I have been a worshiper of you diligently for thousands and thousands of years. I am so great you put me in the company of the angels. But here, now you're asking me to prostrate before this thing you just created, that even the angels questioned you about why you created it and that it's going to cause bloodshed and corruption on earth, and I'm supposed to prostrate before that? That's all the things he was thinking about, right? How is that different when we look at someone else and we say, I did all these things. Why am I not getting this? Why am I not getting that? So this skewed, as Satan had and still has, understanding of reality, this is the thing that we have to work on first. And no question that we are people who are affected by our culture and by our environment. And there's definitely, I would say, in the post-industrial world of North America, or at least the industrialized Western nations, there's this notion that if you work hard enough and you put enough effort in, then you will reap the rewards, right? And that if you find yourself in a situation that is not like that, a situation of destitution or poverty or what have you, then it's your own fault. And you got to look to yourself to why you wound up in that situation. That definitely is not the ethos from the Islamic tradition, not at all. Rather, it's the opposite. Everyone's lot in life, right, is determined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that circumstantial lot in life, in other words, the circumstances, your rizq, how much you have or how much you don't have, is something that was predetermined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in no way is indicative of your place with God. It's no way indicative of your level of piety. It's not used as a means to reward you or punish you. That's how the reality is. That's how we see it from our perspective. So whether you have much material accumulation or you have a little bit of it, that is not a determinant in where do I stand, right? Where it's important where I stand. في الملأ الأعلى, right? In the higher realm, where is my standing? So what you have here, or your social standing in this life, where it's a life of delusion and a life of mirage and blindness to reality. It doesn't matter if you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company or you're the person who sweeps the floors of the lobby of that company. Your place with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no relevance to that whatsoever. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said it himself. He said, رُبَّ أَشْعَثَ أَغْبَرَ, perhaps a destitute, disheveled person that you don't give any credence to, if they were to swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He would give him exactly what he or she wants. So he's kind of revolutionizing the way that we look at our social and economic and so forth standing with one another, right? Which is the basis of hasad, which is the basis of envy. So first of all, look at the reality the way it is, right? What I have, it's not because I deserve it. It's by what we call mahad al-fadl. It's by pure mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That whatever you have, you have. And so when even Allah asks you to part with some of it, right, that He has given you, right, then that's not really asking you to part of something that's yours. He's asking you to part of something that's His. And He's only merely asking you to redistribute it. He already distributed it to you, and now He's making a request, and not for a whole large part of it, quite a very small part of it, that you are to redistribute that to those He thinks are the ones who are worthy of it or deserving of it in the divine eye, not in your eye. So what would be better to spend? That which you think is worthy in your eyes or worthy in Allah's eyes, right? There's no question, there's no comparison between the two. So then why the envy? Why the hasad? Why do you believe you deserve things, right? You don't deserve anything. So if you look at everything that you have been given as a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that means everything everyone else has been given is also a gift from God. So if you're questioning the distribution of that gift to someone else, you're not questioning that person. Who are you questioning? You're questioning Allah. That's why the hasad can destroy you, right? You can be completely consumed by it to the degree that's all you think about. Why this person? And unfortunately, I've seen it happen in a lot of Muslim families in particular, right? Sibling rivalry, and especially when inheritances are passed out and that type of thing. All of these type of things come to bear, right? Why did she have to marry that particular person who has more money and my husband is the one who has less? You find that a lot, right? And the hasad also will come between people who are seemingly close, right? Usually between two friends, siblings, people who have close proximity somehow in life. And they're the ones who might be the most envious, right? And so even within our deen, right, I always say this to people, that the Sharia is addressing reality as it is, not some type of utopia the way we want it. So for both the one who is the object or could be the possible object of envy, there are particular precautions they should take. Just like the person who is envious, he has his own route too. So, for example, if you look to Muslim civilizations and cultures as they developed around the world in the traditional architecture, you found very, very, very little ostentation on the outward aspect of things, right? If you walk through, Sayyid Abdul Rahman, we went to Fas, I think one year, I don't know how many years ago that was. But if you walk through the old city, right, where cars can't pass through and they're kind of like maybe 2.5 or 3 meters wide or something like that, and you look to the houses on either side, basically you just see kind of contiguous wall, and then there are doors. And, I always wondered what are behind those doors. I remember many years ago, I actually had the opportunity to go inside one of these houses, and you walk inside and it's like, what? You find this ornate tile, and you find these fountains, and you find a courtyard that's open up, with sunlight coming in, and they have like, plants and trees and all this type of stuff going on inside, and you would have never known that just from the outside, right? This is also true in Damascus, for example, where I lived a number of years in the 90s. The old Arab houses, you walk in, is completely different. And you walk in from one to the next, and you can't actually tell the difference between the millionaire and the one who barely has enough to get by, because they may have kind of the same basic shape and design from the outside, but once you walk inside, right, in their own private area, then the athar al-ni'mah, right, the outward aspect of the blessing, you can see it. And these mabani, right, these outward edifices are taba' lil ma'ani, they follow the ma'ani. right? And you find this traditional kind of architecture, even the way people used to dress. You didn't actually find a big kind of difference between the way people used to dress. They dressed kind of nominally the same, right? So there wasn't this open type of ostentation, right? And then you read, the books of adab, right, that came about in Islam that talk about particular etiquettes. And it would say, for example, that you shouldn't let the smoke of your barbecue that you're doing in your house reach your neighbor without you offering them something, right? When you are bringing goods and groceries into your house, it should be concealed, and not so that people can see what you're bringing in your house or what you're not bringing in your house. There are still people who practice this to this day. Compare that to contemporary culture of keeping up with the Joneses, right? It's like, oh wait, look, they got a new, GMC Arcadia SUV. I think, our 2-year-old Chevy Tahoe is kind of not cutting it right now. We have to think about, and this rat race, as they call it, keeping up with the person next to you because you want to feel like they don't have one up on you. And this is between neighbors, right? We said between people who are very close. Between neighbors, between friends, between siblings, you find this type of thing. So there are steps that you should take because it's the right thing to do. It's the adab, right? Don't be outwardly ostentatious. And I believe, and I think many of this room would believe, the most beautiful civilizations that were built by Muslims were predicated on these meanings, these ma'ani, right? That we're not ostentatious to one another, that, you had what would be called mixed use residential areas, right? You didn't really have, at least in the earlier period, where the rich people lived in these big mansions and gated communities away from everybody else, and then you have the have-nots living in tight quarters with one another far away from that. But you look to the international trends, and you have the trend of gated community far away from people, especially where the state system is inadequate. And so they build these massive gated communities with these palatial houses out there, and they kind of have their own enclosed ecosystems where they have kind of their own stores inside, and they have their own, maybe a different even sanitation system, everything much different than what the state runs on the outside, because they can pay. They can afford it. That's a recipe for hasad. And it's a recipe for disaster down the road. Because one day, right, when it's no longer tenable, the situation, where is the first place that those people will go? Where will the strife happen? What will be the object, not just of envy, but of anger, and maybe more, will be in those places that were quite ostentatious and separate themselves out from everybody else. Where in traditional Muslim communities, like I said, mixed groups, mixed socioeconomic groups were all living in very close proximity with one another, and you couldn't really tell the difference between one and the other except maybe by their door, right? And even having a very ostentatious door was not desirable, right? And the zakhara fil abwab, it's talked about in Islamic literature as, they didn't talk about having ostentatious house, they talked about doors, because they knew that the door was the only thing that separated or kind of differentiated one house from the next. Because it was a given that the houses from the outside look the same. So they say, don't make your door too ostentatious, right? Make your door similar to other people's doors. And that's kind of one of the golden principles of living in a vibrant and very successful community, is that you take care for the hearts of others, not just your heart, right? But we do the opposite, right? We kind of like it when we show up on people. Right? We kind of like it when we're impressive to a degree. Even when you walk inside the houses, the traditional architecture would have kind of a sitting, kind of guest receiving room, and then the rest of the house is not really visible to you. So you don't even know how big the house is once you get in there. And then you're just sitting in the receiving room, and everybody had a receiving room. And it was, similarly equipped from one person to the next. But nowadays, look at the trend in architecture as of late, maybe the past 10 and 20 years. You have a blending of the living room and the family room and the kitchen, and they call it what? The great room, right? You have the great room. And the thing about the great room is as soon as you open the front door, you have to be able to see the whole thing in its size and how big it is. I was house shopping many years ago, so I remember all this. So then the great room, right, is this huge thing so that people can see how much you have. That's the mana, right? That's the meaning behind it. How is that Islamic? How does that come from Islamic ethos, right? That you have this big, great room that's very ostentatious. Ours is the opposite, right? We want to be humble. We want to, allay people's hearts and their fears and not make them feel that I'm showing up on them and showing off in the things that I possess. Because the way that Muslims traditionally used to show off was by their character, by their virtue, not by what they possess, not by what they accumulate, right? Not what's in their hands, but what's in their heart. So the current kind of climate we live in makes it easy for envy to happen, right? Very easy for people to be envious. And I think this clown in America that they call Donald Trump, he is playing on the worst fears of people. Those people who are following him, I don't dismiss all of them as kind of just stupid people who don't know anything. No, they're people who have a lot of fear, a lot of fear about their futures, both economically and socially. They're not sure where they're going, where they're coming from. They feel like their way of life perhaps will no longer exist some years from now. It's being encroached upon and all these things. And so they're following the demagogue who is promising them a so-called promised land, but based upon stoking the worst in humanity, their fears, right? And their envy of others, seemingly who seem to have so much more than them. And then they make them the object of their derision, right? That's why it works, right? We have to admit it, that appealing to the lowest common denominator, to people's base, primal instincts, is effective. It does work, right? Look at all the demagogues throughout our history. They play on people's fear, and they play on people's envy of one another in order to set them one another, in order for them to accumulate the power that they want to do. So we have to be very aware of this, and we have to make sure that that we're not part of the problem, that we're at least we're part of the solution. So that means rooting out envy from our own hearts, right? And I think that begins with reorienting your worldview, reorienting how you see the world. And it's not about the quote-unquote Protestant work ethic, which is the dominant culture in North America, for example. Work hard, you'll be rewarded, you'll get the things that you want. That's actually breaking down now. That's why people like Trump have risen to prominence, because that model is not holding true. Because there are many, many people who are working quite hard, right, for very low wages, and it's going nowhere for them. And so the social contract, right, that was the basis of North American societies is now being severely challenged. And so this type of rhetoric carries currency. So what we have to do then is realize it never worked, right? It only works in times of plenty, when there's plenty to go around. But when there's times of not plenty, it doesn't work, obviously. So that means it never works. And we have to see that our lot in life, that which we have been assigned, has been assigned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's been assigned by God, by no one else. And it in no way serves as an indicator of how important you are, or where you're going to be in the next life, or if you're pious enough or not pious enough. None of that has any relevance whatsoever. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he chose to be amongst al-masakeen. He said, Allah, make me amongst the masakeen, those who don't have much, and I want to enter paradise with them and exit with them, al-masakeen. And in one of the hadith, it says that the masakeen, those who are without, will enter paradise 500 years before everybody else. And that means that al-ghina, right, is ghina nafs. That means that the true wealth or sufficiency is sufficiency of heart, which means it's a belief you hold inside of you, not what you possess in your hand. Because if you're convinced and you're content with your allotment in life in terms of your circumstances, then you're wealthy. Then you're not in want of anything. But the person can own 10 yachts and have 10 hotel franchises. But if they're looking for the 11th and the 12th, and it's never enough, and they always want more, they're always going to be in a state of poverty. They're always going to be destitute, because they'll never have that thing which is the most precious thing, which is contentment of heart. If your heart is not content, you can possess all that you want in the world. So don't fall into the delusion, the trap, that by much accumulation, it will lead to a softness and contentment in the heart. It doesn't. Go ask all of those people who are celebrities and all of those people who possess everything and all of the ones who are on Valium, and ask them, did you find what you're looking for? Did you find that softness and that contentment in your heart? And they did not find it. And they will never find it that way. The way that you find it is by knowing your Lord. And know your Lord is a benevolent Lord, He's a merciful Lord, He's a compassionate Lord. That which He has given you in life is a complete and utter gift from Him, and it's only by His mercy that you have those things. And so you should be content with Allah's display of mercy towards you. Right? قُلْ بِفَضْلِ اللَّهِ وَرَحْمَتِهِ فَبِذَلِكَ فَلْيَفْرَحُوا هُوَ خَيْرٌ مِمَّا يَجْمَعُونَ. Say, by the virtue and mercy of God, you should find your happiness. It is greater than all the things you think that you have accumulated. Accumulation will not lead to ghina, right? Will not lead to self-sufficiency of the soul. In other words, not to be in need of other souls for your validation, right? We also look to other people to validate us. You don't need anyone to validate you. You only need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to validate what you're doing. And if you have that self-contentment, right, and you are pleased with what Allah has allotted you in life, why would you be envious of anyone then? Why would you want what someone else has? Because that's their lot in life, right? That which was meant for you was never going to miss you. And that which was not meant for you was never going to come, right? This is in the hadith that Prophet ﷺ taught these words to the Sahaba. That which is meant for you was never going to miss you. And that which was not meant for you was never going to come. So don't fret about things that you don't have, right? And don't think about all the things that other people have that you would like to have. The thing that is available for you to have, right, which is always open to you, is the path to God. That doesn't require any zeros on your bank account. It only requires sidq at-tawajjuh, to turn sincerely, right, and patiently towards God, towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no other requisite. You don't need to have anything else. And you could be in a 10,000 square foot palace on the French Riviera, or you could be in a rotting jail cell. Seriously. You could still turn towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That will never be closed off from you. So it's nothing about your outward circumstances. And sometimes your outward circumstances, they in fact can be the facilitator and the means for you to find that, right? And if you have what's called good dhan, husn dhan billah, right? You have a good opinion of God, then God will be where your good opinion is, as He says in the Hadith Qudsi. He will be where your good opinion of Allah is. So if you have a good opinion of God, then everything about you will be good. But if you have a bad opinion, you have ittiham, and you're accusing God, even though you don't say it with your tongue, but you're thinking it implicitly, when you covet what other people have, and you want what other people have to go away, it's as if you're saying to Allah, you made a mistake. That person shouldn't have that stuff. They shouldn't have these things. They don't deserve it. I know better than you. That's what you're saying. Basically, that's exactly what you're saying when you covet and when you're envious of what other people have. So realize the enormity of that, right? It's no small thing. It's no small task, to say, I object to the divine decree. And this is what gets people into trouble. This is what makes people unhappy. This is what makes people do the things that they do, that they're not accepting of their allotment in life. Does that mean that you're always pleased with yourself? No, being pleased with yourself actually is a vice, right? But being displeased with yourself is a virtue in the sense that I can always do something more, right? I can always, in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I can be doing something better than I'm doing. But those things that have been thrust upon me as my circumstances, right? Imam al-Zarruq, he said, there's two type of ahkam or judgments in life. He calls one al-hukm al-taklifi, another one al-hukm al-ta'rifi. So al-hukm al-taklifi is that which Allah requests of you. So as Muslims, we know there's things that are obligatory you need to do, then there's things that are recommended, and things we have to stay away from, haram or makruh. Then there are things that are permissible. That is something that comes from Allah, definitely. So it's a command, it's a divine command from God. The other divine command, and it's interesting the word that he uses, he calls it al-hukm al-ta'rifi, right? He calls it the command by which you may know God, right? Which you may know God. And what does he mean by this? He means your circumstances. He means your trials and tribulations in life. He means your moments of ease in life. These are means by which to know Allah. So in actuality, it's a manifestation of Allah's compassion and mercy that He puts you through some trials or tribulations or moments of difficulty. Because it's a way for you to know Allah. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the attributes of Jalal or majesty, and He has the attributes of Jamal or beauty. And you need to know God via both. He is Qahhar, He is overpowering. He is overwhelming. He is muntaqim. He is the avenger when he wants to be. But at the same time, he has sifat al-jamal, right? He is al-Rahman. He is al-Rahim. He is al-Latif. He is al-Khabir. He is also those attributes. And so for us to be balanced, then we need to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from both sides of that scale, both sides of that balance. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said it himself, right? When he was offered Batha Mecca to be gold, the whole valley of Mecca could have been gold. He was given this option, right? And it's one of the things about the seerah that's not talked about so much. And if he had the whole valley gold, he could have done many things, right? He could have at least allayed, even bought the Quraysh who were opposing him and told them that you will still have your returns from the pilgrimage and your way of life is preserved and you don't have to worry about it, everything is fine. He could have been the king over all of them. He was even offered kingship. He refused all those things, and he refused Mecca to be turned into gold. He said, that's not what for me. He said, I rather have be hungry one day so that I may turn fervently towards God and mean it, right? Because when you have nothing, and you have absolutely nothing, and you feel that all the doors are closed, and there's no other way, then necessarily you will seek the door of God. The staunchest atheist will find the way of God. You put him in the middle of the ocean with no provision, no one is coming for them, no land in sight, and all they're doing is just sitting there. They're going to call upon God. I don't doubt it. And that feeling of what we call ittirar, feeling that you have no path, that you have no way to go, that's virtuous. And the idea is you're always like that. Whether you have plenty around you or you have nothing, you're always in complete and utter need towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in those times of difficulty, Allah is reminding us that you are indeed in that state. So the Prophet ﷺ said, I go hungry one day and I turn fervently towards Him. And I am satiated another day when He gives me, and then when I thank Him, right, and I ahmaduhu wa ashkuruhu, then I do it with meaning, right? I do it like I really mean it, right? Because it's difficult for you to say alhamdulillah and you're not happy with your circumstance. And it's difficult also to turn to Allah and ask for things when you feel like you don't need anything, right? But you're always in need of things, number one. Your very next breath you're in need of. And number two, all those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, they're not by your will, they're not by your prowess, they're not by your ability, but it's by what Allah has given you. And so we want that state in the heart all the time, the balance between these two impulses, right? The balance between turning towards Allah fervently because you need everything from Him, and at the same time, recognition for all the things that you have, and then thanking Allah properly because of that. Right? One of the great murshids and guides, Abu Hassan al-Shadili, he told his disciples, when you drink the water, make sure you drink it cold. Because when you say alhamdulillah, you want to say it and you mean it. Right? So we want to mean it when we say it. And the way that you can mean it is you recognize all the things that you have. And don't pay attention to what other people have. They have their own trial. They have their own tribulation. As we said the other day, everybody's a story. Everybody's a narrative. You may only see ostensibly that your neighbor just got the new GMC Arcadia 2017 with Apple Play and all the features that everybody wants, but you don't know the whole story behind that, right? Maybe also he's about to foreclose on his house. Maybe also he has a child who's sick. Maybe also he has chronic illness, or his parents are in need. He has all these other stuff going on him. So don't covet what other people have, right? Because you may not really want what they have. And then just look to what you have, right? And look at what other people have as an ibrah, as a moral lesson. The only time Allah asks us to look at what other people have, right, is by taking a moral lesson from them. What's called ibrah, right? So see the ibrah, see the moral lesson, see what Allah did with others, right? And then look to yourself and say, alhamdulillah, that didn't happen to me. Right? Or alhamdulillah, that look what they had. Maybe I can do something similar, right? And I can also have what they had. So look for the moral lesson, not to covet what those people have. So I think we're concluded for now. It's time for Maghrib. And
if you could take us into Maghrib.
So we'll close with a dua. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people of recognition of the many bounties and blessings that Allah has given us. And for us not to covet or have envy of anything that anyone else has, and that we be content with our allotment in life, and that we not be content with our souls, that we always look to improve them, that we always look to fulfill the covenant that Allah has with us in the best way possible, that He lifts the trials and tribulations upon those who are suffering wherever they may be for all our brethren throughout the world, and that He grant us the greatest felicity by pronouncing upon our last breath, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam bi asrari Surah Al-Fatiha.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh Walead. That was, mashallah, a lot. Shaykh Waleed's left us with a lot as we begin to break our fast. I'm going to ask Sidi Imad to give the